As the demand to defund the police intensifies among rioters and protesters, the Minneapolis City Council has actually vowed to defund the Minneapolis Police Department. Before we look at their plan specifically, and spoiler alert, they don't have one, let's look at what it means generally to defund the police. There is a belief that I've seen that whenever someone says defund the police, that means they want no police officers whatsoever. And I'm sure there are some who feel that way, like the real anarchists, but most people don't really mean that. Here from The Guardian, we can actually see what they're calling for. They say that defunding the police means that the government budgets and public safety spending should prioritize housing, employment, community health, education, and other vital programs instead of police officers. So generally, when someone is saying defunding the police, it means take some of the money allotted to the police departments and redirect that to a different public office. Now, I would argue that while education is certainly vital, as are housing and employment, all these other things, police officers are also pretty vital. So I don't think it's necessarily the best idea, but I do want to point out that just because someone says defund the police, it doesn't mean get rid of all of the police spending. The Guardian points out here that maybe one of the reasons that we should defund the police is because of how much we spend on it. For example, in the past 4 decades, the cost of policing has tripled, and we now spend $115 billion, which, as they point out, this steady increase comes as crime has been consistently declining. So many people would look at that and say, why are we spending more on police now than we did back 40 years ago when we have significantly less crime? But the fairly obvious counter to that is perhaps we have less crime because we're spending more on police. And if we were to decrease spending on the police, crime would begin to rise. And that is certainly a possibility. Looking specifically at Minneapolis now, recently, 9 members of the Minneapolis City Council have vowed to dismantle the city's police department entirely, and they want to replace it with a new community-based system of public safety. Now, if that sounds broad and undefined to you, that's because it is. This article also points out that Minneapolis is yet to provide any details of what a new law enforcement system may look like. The city councilors of Minneapolis have vowed to defund and dismantle the Minneapolis Police Department, but they don't really have any plan in place on what to do afterwards. They have a general idea that they want to divert police funding to treatment services such as mental health counselors and drug addiction experts, but that's not really anything specific. And it is worth mentioning that Minneapolis has a fairly high crime rate. By no means is it the worst in the United States, but it is higher than 94% of cities in the United States. So if you really want to defund and dismantle the police department, perhaps you shouldn't do it in a city that has more crime than 94% of cities in the United States. That seems like a recipe for disaster, especially since there aren't any real plans in place. They just know they want to get rid of it, and they're probably going to do it. Black Lives Matter is also calling for the defunding of the police. I don't know if they started it or if they just exaggerated it, but the fact of the matter is they have this page on their website dedicated to defunding the police. And this is what they say. We call for an end to the systematic racism that allows this culture of corruption to go unchecked and our lives to be taken. We call for a national defunding of police. So here they're calling for national. I just want to point that out. Not just in one city or a few, but all over the United States, we need to completely defund the police on a national level. That seems pretty severe to me. It continues, we demand investment in our communities and resources to ensure Black people not only survive, but thrive. And then it wants me to sign my name on a petition, which I certainly did not do. There is one more thing I want to highlight here. But before we do that, I stumbled across this also on the Black Lives Matter website, where they have a petition demanding the government does more to respond to the coronavirus crisis. They seem to have quite a lot of petitions on Black Lives Matter. What they say here is that we demand more from the government. And I feel this is very ironic. They are demanding the government do more to respond to this crisis, while at the same time, they are encouraging and incentivizing people to go out and protest like this, which is going to have the very opposite effect. Now back to the previous page, they say that we need to ensure Black people not only survive, but thrive. Which I agree with, that they should survive and thrive, but the implication here is that they're not surviving or thriving because of the police. And it's not just Black Lives Matter. Gayle King recently said it feels like open season on Black men because of what's been happening with George Floyd and everything else. And you have articles like this, agreeing with her from the Huffington Post, saying it's open season on Black men again. Or this paper titled, Why Police Kill Black Males with Impunity. Now, looking at all of that, it seems to paint a picture. Now, if you were to look at all of that, it kind of paints a picture where the police don't care whatsoever about Black lives. And that, as we can see, they're being killed with impunity. But that's not true. The data do not back that up. The Washington Post has a database called Fatal Force, where they show in 2019, 1,004 people were shot and killed by the police. Now, there's one big caveat here, and you can probably see it. That's only how many people were shot and killed by the police, not who were killed in police custody or by the police more generally. We don't have that information, though the Root tried to estimate as best they could, and they got the number to 1,112, which is about a 10% increase. But because the Washington Post database is quite a bit easier to look at than this, we're going to stick with Washington Post. What you find is that out of the 1,004 people shot and killed by police in 2019, only 25% of them were black, so about 250. Out of them, if you look at the weapons that they had, almost 200 of them had either a gun or a knife. As a matter of fact, only 15 of them were unarmed, and 6 of them had some sort of toy weapon. So what that means is that out of the 1,000 people shot and killed by police in 2019, only 15 of them were unarmed and black. That is 1.5%. Now, I'm certainly not saying this to downplay the lives that were lost, because that is a tragedy. George Floyd was a tragedy. All of these are. What I am saying is that if you were to believe the articles and things we just saw claiming that cops kill black men with impunity, or that it's open season on black men, you'd expect these numbers to be quite a bit higher. The fact of the matter is, it's not that high. 250 deaths, again, while a tragedy, does not really amount to open season on black men. So my issue here is not pointing out that these tragedies have occurred, because they certainly have. No one's denying that. But it is trying to take those tragedies and pretend that it happens on a daily basis on a large scale, because that's not accurate. They're overselling their hand, and it just doesn't seem to work. Which is also why the call to defund the police, in my opinion, is pretty stupid. If you want to call to change the police, or make it more community-based or more local, that's one thing. But saying we want to defund the police, even if you don't mean completely defund the police, it has a pretty specific connotation that a lot of people don't really like. Now, to highlight maybe one positive of if all of this does happen, if the police are defunded, perhaps Americans will be more respectful of the Second Amendment. As we see, because of this epidemic and the riots that have happened, gun sales have actually increased quite a bit. So if this continues, maybe the Second Amendment will actually be more respected than it is now, once you can't rely on the police to protect you and you need to do it yourself. Now, I'm not saying that's what we should do, but I'm saying maybe it's a silver lining if that's what happens. Obviously, we should keep a police force because they're vital. Changes can be made, and that's understandable. But to attempt to dismantle it completely or defund it at a national level just makes no sense to me. Not only is it a fairly stupid policy, in my opinion, but it's very dangerous. If you can't rely on the police to protect you, things are going to get pretty bad. And that's all I had for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.